If you're really lucky, in your lab you'll get to work with biological specimens, which are any biological tissues, fluids, or organisms. At first, you might be grossed out, because often these are preserved animals and other organisms. But with biological specimens, we get the exciting opportunity to learn firsthand about anatomy, physiology, biochemical processes, disease, health, nutrition, and so much more. There are any number of reasons you might be working with biological specimens. For example, if you're taking a biology class, you'll likely do dissections of various animals during your lab sessions. It's important to take advantage of these opportunities because you'll learn an incredible amount about how animals look on the inside. You might even be surprised to learn just how similar many animals are to us when it comes to their anatomy. Or, if you're in a medical lab, you might be working with human or animal tissues to test disease treatments, effects of harmful substances, tissue growth, or something else. Or maybe you're a wildlife biologist and you're working with bat guano, picking it apart to see which insects different species of bats prefer to eat. No matter why you're working with biological specimens, it's important that you know how to handle them properly. This will ensure the safety of you and others working in the lab, and lab safety goes hand in hand with lab fun. As you've just seen, biological specimens are instrumental for a variety of professions, and they can provide us with a lot of helpful information. But it's important for those of us working in the lab to handle specimens properly to avoid contamination and other health hazards. Think about it. If you're cooking chicken for dinner, you use a separate cutting board and knife, and you make sure to wash your hands thoroughly before touching the other ingredients. This is because the chicken in your kitchen is like a biological specimen in the lab. When handled correctly, it's just what you need. But when handled improperly, you can make your entire family sick very quickly. Unlike your chicken dinner, but just like anything else in the lab, definitely don't put your biological specimens in your mouth. This sounds like a simple lab rule, but you'd be surprised how many times this type of action leads to totally preventable accidents. It's also important to wear protective gear while working with any biological specimen. Depending on what you're working with, it may be necessary to wear eye goggles, a lab coat, and an apron. But at minimum, you should at least wear gloves to protect your hands. Many of the specimens that are used in biology labs are preserved with formaldehyde, which is great for preservation, but can be dangerous if you get it on your skin, in your eyes, or breathe in the fumes. If you're working with live organisms, which is often the case in a medical research lab, you may need to protect yourself from bites, scratches, or other contact with your specimens. Live animals present an entirely different range of possible accidents than preserved animals, so your handling protocols may be quite expensive, and you should familiarize yourself with them for your own safety as well as the safety of others. As mentioned before, you may be working with human tissues or bodily fluids in your lab, which are common disease vectors. If these are the types of specimens you'll be working with, you'll need to be extra careful and follow all safety precautions outlined for you. Gloves, eye protection, and lab coats are hard minimums because they will protect your hands, eyes, skin, and clothing from contact with possibly dangerous or deadly samples. Once you're finished working with your specimens, you're done, right? Just pick everything up and toss it in the garbage? Definitely not. As with anything else in the lab, disposal of a specimen depends entirely on what the specimen is. First, you'll need to properly clean any instruments you use during your lab work. Some may need to be run through an autoclave, a pressurized chamber that sterilizes equipment, while others may simply be cleaned with soap and water or a small amount of bleach. If you used any scalpels or needles, those will need to be disposed of in a sharps container. This bright red box safely collects used sharps and will prevent someone from being stuck with a used needle or scalpel tip. Sharps should never be disposed of in a garbage can, because if someone reaches in there or grabs the bag to remove it from the bin, they could be hurt, or even worse, infected by the contaminated instrument. Preserved animals need to be treated and disposed of in the same manner as the chemicals that preserve them. So if your dissection specimens are preserved in formaldehyde, you'll need to treat those animals as if they themselves are formaldehyde. They will need to be properly bagged and labeled so that they can be disposed of properly by supervisory lab staff. If you're working with pathogens or microbial organisms, especially infectious or possibly harmful ones, these should be properly destroyed and all lab equipment completely sterilized. This type of lab work can be extremely useful for science, but as you can imagine, it is also potentially very dangerous if not controlled. We could go on for some time about different disposal techniques for the many different kinds of biological specimens. But your lab will be required to instruct you on how to properly dispose of your specimens and also have these instructions printed in an easily accessible place so that you can refer to them as needed. And of course, if you ever have a question about how to safely work with or dispose of a specimen, your lab supervisor is the best person to help you with this. Take advantage of their knowledge. They are there to assist you in having a safe and fun experience in the lab. Biological specimens can make lab work incredibly fun and interesting. We can learn a lot about diseases, other animals, and even ourselves by studying these tissues, fluids, and organisms in our lab work. Depending on the nature of your work, you may use preserved animals or live ones, human tissues, microbes, or even animal pellets or hair. Both the safe handling and disposal procedures you employ will depend entirely on the types of specimens you're working with. Some specimens require extensive bodily protection, while some require only the use of protective gloves. Some specimens need to be destroyed or sterilized before being disposed of. You should be informed of all safety protocols before you begin working, but if you ever have any questions, you can check the written copy of the rules in your lab or ask your lab supervisor.